Welcome to A Lunch with Biggie, a podcast about small business and creatives sharing their stories and inspiring you. My guest today is a creative consultant. She's a wielder of the sacred brush. She does a little bit of everything from murals, body paints, illustration. And if that isn't enough, she's also president and co-founder of A Relatively Speaking and also of the community group Sober Betties. Please welcome the Jill of all trades behind Kaluohs. It's Sarah Shoulak. What's going on, Sarah?
Hey, happy to be here. Appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you so much. No, my pleasure. Thank you so much for taking some time during my lunch break. What's your go-to lunch or sandwich?
I have to say, I've been binging a lot of these episodes to be a fan. And so I've heard other people's answers to this, and I'm trying to think of what mine would be. And there is a sub that has haunted me from when I lived in Miami because I used to be able to walk right down the road to the sub shop, and it was pretty classic cold cuts, but the way that they did their veggies with the onions and the peppers and the oil, salt and pepper, really pretty basic things, but the combination of how dense that hoagie bun was and then the way that they did the toppings that were just soaking, like by the time I'd walk back to my place, the whole roll would be juicy and it kind of marinated through. Like I said, it haunts me. And I've been in Orlando 9 years and I still dream of that sandwich.
That's funny. What was it called? Did it have a name, or was it just like a regular cold cut sub?
I think it was the kind of place where they didn't even have a menu. They were you just walk in and you say all of the things that you want, but nothing was posted. So it's not like it was a turkey tom or something like that. So you just walk in and the onions, I remember distinctly, they were like diced minced onions. So it was just like they'd grab a handful of them and it's just half water. So it was so good.
Yeah. That's all. I love that. There's a place in Chicago that I love, and when I'm supposed to go in the fall, and it's like I absolutely loved because I got to see them make it. And one of the things that they did was they actually have like a little boat, and they would put the lettuce and the tomato, shredded lettuce, so the shreddus, and then they would add the oil, vinegar, and all that stuff, salt and pepper, toss it.
Ooh.
So that way, and then throw it onto the sub. And the reason they did that, and that was the reason why I think it's one of my favorite Italian subs I've ever had, is because then all the lettuce holds on to the oil and all those things, and then it just doesn't run off and
100%.
drip as you're eating it. So I'm like the thought process behind that, like I appreciate those things, the thought process of those things. Okay, so as much as I could talk sandwiches all day, I want to unpack a little bit my intro. Let's talk a little bit about Kaluohs, which, if you haven't figured it out, and based on how you say it, it is your last name spelled backwards. How did that part start? And then we'll kind of unpack some of these things, some of the intro stuff that I have for you.
I appreciate that. When I started doing art more professionally, I was in Miami and I was doing it under a different name. It was an LLC that I don't use anymore. So I was always working it as that, but DBA, just me doing art, and I was doing a lot of recycled art. And when I was in Miami, I was in my graduate program at the University of Miami. And so by the time I'd gotten my master's, I started teaching as a professor at FIU. And I was doing some kind of weird stuff. I was cosplaying, I was doing recycled art, I was dabbling into body painting and starting into that world. And I think the use of the pseudonym was the anonymity of not letting my students find me or making it just a little bit harder for my students to find me. So there are probably some people who've been following me who will hear this and it'll be the first time they realize that Kaluohs is my last name spelled backwards, because people like to think that it looks Hawaiian or maybe some type of native, that it means something or it has some symbolism. But no, it was just, I used to joke that it was that my art was the opposite of what my family always wanted.
I love that. That's actually, I can see that. And it also kind of shows, it's kind of like the alter ego, the mirror, the opposite, like the reflection of like what you do or what you studied or whatnot. It's like a different version of expression.
Exactly.
You could say. I love that. So who inspired your love of art and creativity?
Definitely a lot of early influences, which I think a lot of artists will talk about. We were talking before the intro about LinkedIn and that life, and there is a LinkedIn newsletter that I've been putting out to kind of bolster my professional side. And the one I talked about most recently is this blending of these worlds, because for a long time I did want them to be very separate. All my LinkedIn facing very professional things over here, all my crazy creative unhinged stuff over here, and never shall the two meet. And what I realize now as I get into my 30s is, and getting close to this decade in Orlando, is that I have a lot more overlap than I expected there to be, and a lot of my connections come from people that I've met in other situations. So, uh, in that article, I talk about the fact that every artist is going to say they've always been an artist. But in particular, my dad was a stay at home dad, and we did a lot of crafts together. And his brother is my uncle slash godfather, and Uncle Joe. And Uncle Joe is a big graphic designer, and he ended up, going and traveling the world and always being this person who was chasing dreams and just doing whatever he wanted and doing art along the way. So I feel like there's a lot of that Uncle Joe-edness in my path.
I love that. No, and I think that I kind of feel like sometimes there's got to be someone, I feel, and a lot of times someone's got to be some form of, like, I don't know, light that kind of start leads that way, because it's not something usually sometimes that you, unless it's something that you're just into, but a lot of times I do feel like there is some kind of level of that. I know I mentioned like you're a Jill of all trades because you do, and I know you talked about recycled art. You do a bunch of mixed medium art, and then you also do, I also know you also, like you mentioned, you also do cosplay. What got you into doing cosplay?
It was the recycled art that started in
Because you were
Miami.
using recycled art to create the cosplay,
That's
correct?
exactly what happened. So
Yeah.
my biggest claim to fame that I'll always talk about, that I still have to pinch myself to know that it happened, is that I did get to participate in Art Basel when I lived in Miami, and so I did get to have my. It wasn't, main stage, so it just
Yeah.
happened at the same time in a gallery in Miami, but I still get to say I participated. And so I had recycled mosaics. So they were little tiny pieces of paper. They would be business cards, cell phone packaging, anything. I had Whoppers wrappers and takeout menus, and this was like a recycled mosaic that I would make. And then a friend, and it's funny because now this friend that I'm referencing, she lives in Orlando too, and we've reconnected. But Jackie Spider Girl, or JSG cosplay, she connected with me in Miami and said, you've got this theater background, you're really creative, you like being on stage, you teach public speaking. Why don't you just put these things together and play dress up and do cosplay with us? So I was still doing these recycled mosaics. I started doing cosplay with, not, I mean, it was probably about half and half store bought and commission stuff. I wasn't making a lot of my own stuff yet, but I started to realize how expensive everything was that was related to cosplay. And I'm a very crafty, scrappy person. And so one of the first things I made that was recycled was, if you're a fan of, what is the fifth element? Sixth, the fifth, not
Yeah.
sixth, the fifth element. Um, there's that girl with the shaved head and the neon green skirt, and she's got that giant blaster gun for all the cult followers who like that movie. So I made that blaster gun out of Pringles containers and plumbing materials, and the trigger was like the trigger for spray paint cans, and nobody realized it. Nobody was coming up to me and be like, you're carrying around a pile of trash. Like, no one knew that I had done that, and I felt like it was the greatest hack of all, was to use found materials, rather than spend $300 on a blaster gun.
No, I think that's phenomenal to be able to do that. I wish I was that crafty and that intuitive to be able to kind of be like, look at, and it's definitely a different mindset of having to kind of look at things and say, oh, I can create something else with this. Do you have a favorite medium out of the stuff that you do, like between the murals, the body painting, illustration, and all that? Do you have like a favorite that you kind of like feel like you're kind of like that's something that you love to do?
I think that picking a favorite medium as an artist is like picking a favorite kid or pet. It's just going to be
Or
really
favorite
challenging.
sandwich?
100%. And so I feel like it comes down to what mood am I in. And as I get older, I feel like your 30s is when you start eliminating things, whether it's people, carbs, or hobbies you don't like anymore. Like, it's just the time. So
Yeah.
what I've started realizing is, like, I can say I do murals, but I know that I mean indoor murals. I'm not going to go trying to pitch every single mural project that I can, because I know I'm not going to be the best for that. So that kind of ties into why I call myself a creative consultant, because if I said I was a makeup artist or a muralist or any one of those individual verticals, I'd have to be the best in that space. But if I come to people and say, my superpower is my creativity, is my ability to look at your project and say, let me dissect this and tell you how to do it, we might be ending that lunch by saying, and I'm going to give you my friend so and so's number, because I'm not going to be the person to do this project, but here's how you do it. Have fun.
No, I think that's awesome, and that kind of goes into, because that's something similar to what you currently do with, like, I believe you and your mom own a business, relatively speaking. So I kind of wanted to know a little bit more about that, and I kind of wanted to, and then I kind of wanted to see if there was like a common theme that you've seen from them. But tell folks a little bit about that idea of how you decided to start that business with your mom.
I completely blame my mom for this business. And the reason is that when what you have to know about my mom is that my mother was a titan in corporate America. At her peak, she actually was the president of Buffalo Wild Wings North America operations. So
Yep.
she oversaw, if you heard of Buffalo Wild Wings, she was the head of that domestically for probably about 18 years total that she worked there, not in that role, but just over the course of it. So when you think about late 80s, breaking the glass ceiling, women working their way up, that's why I mentioned earlier I had a stay at home dad. They realized her career was taking off and he was working at a Kohler toilet factory. So he's like, I'll take kid duty. You go to corporate America. And it
Yep.
was 2017 that she decided to retire from Buffalo Wild Wings. That's also about the time that they were bought out by Arby's in their chronology. So interesting things were happening. And she said, you know what? I'm not going to do this anymore. And her brainchild for retirement, which I use air quotes for the podcast listeners, is that she was only retiring from traditional work. That woman is never going to sit still. She is where I get my serial entrepreneurialism and the fact that I have to keep doing things and be productive and contribute to society. So I have two
Yep.
brothers, and at that point of retirement, she decided she was going to open one business with each of her children, which we now look back on and say was a horrible idea to open three businesses at the same time, but it was really cute when she was telling people about it. And with my younger brother, she started a Mathnasium franchise, which many people know about. They're the math tutoring centers. With my older brother, she started a franchise called Bach to Rock, which is similar to Mathnasium, but they do all types of instruments and music instruction. And then with me, so we didn't have a franchise, we didn't have the overhead. We looked at our combined experience and the fact that she had all of this HR experience from years in corporate operations, and then I had this kind of younger millennial view studying, I got my master's degree, studying people, doing different things, but always experiencing the same pain points no matter what industries we were in. So the name comes, it's a pun, it comes from the fact that we are relatives and we're speaking. And so we do any type of presentations, facilitations, training, workshops, kind of whenever you have a team, big or small, and you want them all to get on the same page, we'd be able to help you. So we've gone around and done different seminars, we've done conferences, we get booked out for private things. And right now, our big hot item is actually private coaching. So women who are at a certain point in their career and maybe never had a female mentor, now they get this double bang for their buck that they get to talk with both Judy and myself about our experiences and kind of get two different viewpoints on every issue.
And that kind of goes into, so is there a common, based on what you've seen, is there a common issue all business owners and entrepreneurs combat? Like, is there, do you have any words of wisdom? And obviously I know that's a very open question, but I'm like, have you noticed a certain trend, with certain businesses and regardless of, of industry that, you've noticed? And then, is there anything that you can share with that?
100%. The easiest answer to that is conflict. because it's the thing that we all experience, whether it's conflict with your budget or it's conflict with your workforce or it's conflict with, through the pandemic when things were difficult to get and your production becomes the conflict. That in itself is the area that we always targeted. So my mother and I, we had our conflict resolution workshop was one of the highest requested, or the one that we would always incorporate when we would do team building. We always start with that because your approach to conflict is going to directly impact how everything else works, right? So depending on which method you take, if you're a very aggressive confrontational person, you might feel like you're handling things very well, that you're facing them head on, but that can also rub certain people the wrong way or not be as warmly received depending on the situation. So it's never going to be a one size fits all solution, but then to look at it and say, well, then if I try and avoid everything, and if I just sweep it all under the rug and I avoid all my conflict and I say, look at, I'm handling it, I'm just handling it, and sweeping it under the rug, that's going to come back to get you in a different way. So definitely still case by case, but when you ask industry wide, the answer is going to be conflict.
I am kind of curious on what words of encouragement or tips, because obviously as small business owners a lot of times we do have to interact with people and communicate and be able to communicate our business and our ideas, maybe even our passion. Have you noticed like a trend on some of these small businesses or some of these folks that maybe you interact with, especially the creative folks that are trying to do it, like, and provided any guidance to them on like how to be able to express themselves or be able to express their art or their passion to other people? Because I feel like sometimes that's like such a huge area. I mean, I feel like I can have diarrhea of the mouth and just talk, but I know some people just do, that's like that is like their kryptonite. They do not want to do that, and it's so important to be able to showcase that. Is there anything or like tips or techniques or things that you do or that you've seen through your studies, through your masters, and what you've done with workshops, that can help someone kind of maybe get themselves get outside their heads, maybe, or at least to get them more a little bit more comfortable with those things?
Yeah, well, there's a lot to that. And I think that being an individual creative or being a small business owner, you're going to have a lot thrown at you, you know. And as a college professor, when my students would ask me questions, assuming that I would just agree with them and that I would give them this really inflated cliche answer of if you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life and go chase your passions. And I didn't give them that kind of advice. I was very pragmatic. And I said, you have to understand all of the different facets that go into owning your own business, that you're not just the salesperson out there making pitches like you're talking about. You are the accountant, you are the HR, you are the marketing, you are the legal, you are all of these things, and you have to make sure that everything is there together. So my first piece of advice that I'd give to anyone, whether they're small business or creative, is balance. And a good example that I take from that is sometimes how differently I work from Judy, my mother, in the fact that we work together, because in our day job, we also work together, which I'm sure we'll get to. But she is the type of person where she is immediate action, which again is very good. And that inspires me to always be ready and move with urgency and have kind of that pep in your step. But I also think sometimes she has a phrase she loves to say, which is any strength overextended becomes a weakness. So that means I could be talkative, but if you're too talkative, you called it diarrhea of the mouth, right? So if I'm get up and go and I'm always immediate action, then sometimes my actions are not going to be good. They would have just been immediate. They were just, at least I did something, right? So to that point, we do a lot of interviews. And so we do a lot of hiring. We're calling people to try and get them to work for our music schools because now I work with them in that vertical. But she's the kind of person where if a person applies to a job on the call, she's calling them, even if it's a Sunday, she's calling that applicant to say, are you available for an interview right now on a Sunday? Like, so that's what she would do. Where I have a Calendly and I have it set up to the times that I am mentally prepared to take an interview. And it is less important for me to be immediate action, but maybe my immediate action is sending them the link to schedule it. And then it's in their court. So I think balance is a big thing for small businesses, no matter where you are. And then to your point about really having that pitch and making sure that you can communicate yourself clearly, I think it's really important to know the setting that you're in. You know, are you just having lunch with someone? They probably don't need the whole pitch. If you're at a networking event, maybe you can be a little bit more pitchy, but maybe it's targeted by knowing what they have to offer. So you make the pitch with that in mind, knowing, well, I'm going to tell them about this part because they've got a venue I might be able to use or something. Not that you're always looking at people for what you can get out of
Yeah.
them, but making sure that what pitch you're giving, because there's going to be a couple variations that you have, making sure that it's relevant for what you need to get out of that interaction goes a long way.
I think that's super smart because and so true. I mean, I try to make it where it's like I'm not giving the pitch, but a lot of times when the thing comes up, you want to be able to have like how can I at least showcase or tell people what it is that I do or that I'm doing. Especially since, we all wear many different hats. Um One of the things that I truly appreciated during my research for you was you are someone that definitely likes to help people harness their creativity. And I've seen that you created and you had, for a little bit of time, the ArtHaus. And it basically, from what I saw, it's like a place, it was a place for people to be creative, work on their projects. You also even did a web series, from it as well, that you were showcasing different artists. And then either and like the fun part was, like, from what I saw, was like you did everything from having different artists, but then you were also doing artwork or art pieces or art things together as well, where your guests, I think it was called Face of is it Kaluohs? It was like, yeah, Kaluohs, right?
Yep.
Face of Kaluohs. Um, so I kind of wanted to find out a little bit about ArtHaus, where this idea came from. Like, how did it, like, was that actually your house, and like, was that your house, or were you renting it? I was just kind of like, when I saw it, I was like, man, this is a great idea, because it almost felt like, and tell me if this is kind of like, is like almost like a place where, like, hey, if you need a creative outlet where you want to paint but you don't have space, you just come here and you can write, you can hang out on a couch and type and work on a screenplay or whatever, or you want to work on artwork or whatever. It almost like was a house like that. Is that what the intention was?
Yeah, you could have written our commercial. That's exactly what the shtick was. So, um, I guess it's one of those phoenix stories when you think about it, where something burned to ashes and then you wanted to make something better from it. So, I had a really, really unfortunate living situation for a while where I was in a bad relationship. For about 2.5 years. And then his family decided to live with us. And by family, I mean his ex wife, her new wife, and his two children lived with us for 9 months. And it was a
Oh,
very, when I even say that, people, they're like, you can see the math meme of like people trying to calculate, wait, who lived with you for how long and why. Um, and then my house ended up flooding because it was overrun by the number of people that were in the house and all these things happening. So my house ended up flooding. I ended up purging myself of everything. I'm like, you're out of here. You're out of here. The guy's out of here. Like, kicked everything to the curb. And I looked at this house, this 4-bedroom house that I bought I bought it in 2015. Very good prices back then, by the way. So I bought the
oh
house
yeah,
in
for sure.
2015, and it had this 4-bedroom house, which was part of the reason why they weaseled their way in, because it was like, well, you have all this space and we are in need, and yada yada, so forth, so forth. So I had these people living there. The house flooded, everyone's out, and I'm looking at this house, which now has beautiful new terrazzo restored floors and all of these things. And I said, I just can't look at it the same way, and I don't want roommates again. So how could I look at this house in a way that maybe some part of it can make money? Maybe I can monetize some part of it. And I was already going around and restoring all the rooms anyway after the damage to the floors, and I'd gone and gotten new floorboards or baseboards and things like that. So it was exactly what you kind of assumed in the pitch, that it I wanted it the kind of place, because at that time I was at the peak of body painting. I was doing a lot more body painting than anything else at that time. And I thought about it like, if I was going to do a consultation with someone and meet up with someone at a Starbucks, and we're like, so how comfortable are you with your body, and where would you like to be painted, and these kind of like, it would just be a little bit of a weird consultation in public. And so it was meant to be this kind of safe space where, if you can't get your house messy, if you have pets that are going to get into your sewing, if you don't, your HOA won't let you, or you're renting and you can't put a mural up and you want to put a mural up, come paint a wall in ArtHaus. Come do your messy project here. I had a woman who was making a dress, and she put out all her fabric and did the patterns because she couldn't cut the patterns without her cats getting all in it. So, it really was whatever you need from the space, whether that was hosting an event there. And I wanted to curate a lot of things so that people could see the different types of uses. So we did a couple live streams. So they were kind of variety shows, almost like Carol Burnett show with a little less skit comedy. And it was, we'd have live bands and we'd have people doing mocktails and drink things. And it was just kind of a variety show. So those are still on YouTube. You can go back and check those out. And that's actually also where I filmed my YouTube show, which you referenced, which is Faces of Kalouhs, which ran for about 2 seasons, I think. And the premise of that was very similar to Lunch with Biggie, where it was bring a creative on, except what we did was, because it wasn't a podcast, it was all YouTube. So I would dress myself in a character that matched whoever I'd have on. And so sometimes that meant that I would wear a big wig that was very, colorful or flamboyant to match my character. And I remember there's a guy, he's a tattoo artist named Johnny Nobody. He's got a shaved head and those blacked out eyes and all that stuff. And I had a shaved head at the same time. And so when I did that one, I didn't wear a wig at all. And we both were there with our shaved heads. So there's kind of this cuteness of always wanting to match them aesthetically. And then we would do a little interview, ask a few questions, and then we would make something together in a round that I called the collaboration round. So I
I love that.
I made this word up because it's like we're competing, but we're also working together. So we're kind of working together against the clock, and also going to vote and ask the audience and the world, whose piece did you like better? So there was always this really strong marketing element to everything that I did, because I'd have a website for everything, and then it would be like after the show, people could buy the art pieces that we made together and things like that. So I always wanted to help promote people, because it wasn't so much always about showing people my projects, but helping, knowing that I'm a facilitator, knowing that I'm not afraid of the camera, that I can jump up and ask questions. I felt like that was something I could lend to the creative community.
I love that. What led to was COVID part of the situation? Like what led to it, and then do you still live in the house?
Sadly, ArtHaus 615 is gone, but part of my reason for naming it that, 615, was the house number. So it was 615
Uh-huh.
Adirondack Avenue was the house address. I did sell the house in May of last year, because my boyfriend and I have been together for 4 years now. We both owned property, which is a good problem to have, but it got really pricey to both be paying all of the same stuff and
Oh yeah.
utilities when we're always at one house anyway. So we kind of looked
Yeah.
at our real estate situation and said, your place or mine, and his place won. So now you can tell that I'm no longer in this big lavish setup of a 4-bedroom house. I'm bunked up in a condo downtown. So my space to be able to do creative things got kind of tempered. And it took me a little while. I felt like during COVID, I had kind of closeted up a little bit. ArtHaus really formally opened in 2020, because it was the place where a lot of places were closed. So it became kind of a creative oasis for people who wanted to get out and do something creative at that time, but not be around a lot of people, because at that time we still couldn't be around a lot of people. And
Yeah.
then it had a good run for maybe a year and a half or 2 years, and then closed down last year. So I do envision that ArtHaus could pop up somewhere else someday and just be ArtHaus with whatever those numbers of the places that we get.
No, I think that's super fun. I think it's super important, and that kind of it kind of shows like kind of where I always like to kind of see if there's like some kind of thing that dots that connect. And one of the things that I notice, and you mentioned it as well, is like the idea of like the harnessing or the idea of community. I know you also worked. One of the things that we had talked about, you had also you did some work and worked with Curry Ford West, that area. And I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about the importance of having a community, and then especially even a local community when you're a small business or a business. I think sometimes we tend to forget that aspect of it, where it's like owning your own backyard. And so I always appreciate seeing people that are kind of like, hey, we're here to help support you. And I get a little bit more of an idea of what your thought process is on and what your thoughts are on just building community, and how and what are some ways that you can build that community, even if you're not maybe a brick and mortar in your own city or town.
100%. And I think one of my favorite phrases that I say all the time is that the truest, the realest SEO right now, SEO is just such the buzzword of search engine optimization, but I say what it should really stand for is supporting each other. Like if we
I
actually
love it.
just bought things from each other versus Amazon, if we actually shopped small versus XYZ, and we get it. You're not always gonna find a small business owner who's selling that part you need for your air conditioner. Like sometimes you do have to go to the big box places and you have to get what you need, but more often than not, can you find ways to get presents from your small business friends? Or, when you're getting that birthday present or the Mother's Day present or something anniversary present, what are those people? Who are those people you can support and shop with? And then with me being the creative consultant, how are my conversations leading to other people in that community? And that's a big thing for me, is I always saw myself as a connector, because I was gregarious and able to meet all these different people and remember people and say, oh, well, so and so is interested in that kind of thing. So I think always knowing to recommend, that's kind of an ego thing, is that you're comfortable enough recommending someone else, or giving business out to someone else, or that you trust that person. Because when you give an endorsement or a recommendation, you're kind of trusting that other person to give the level of service that you think you would give. So it can get hairy, but connecting it back to the main streets, which I know we talked about a little bit before, the
Yeah.
structure of the organization, which I think is really beautiful for the city of Orlando. The Orlando Main Streets program is the overarching program. And then there's 12 local neighborhoods that are within them. And I won't rattle them all off, but you can look them up. And one of them, I now live closer to the Ivanhoe Village and the Mills 51. But when I was operating ArtHaus was just outside of the boundaries of Curry Ford West, just south of the Milk District, which are two of the other big ones. And so at that point, when I was starting ArtHaus, I had just left a marketing company that I was working downtown. It's where I met my partner. We were working at the same marketing company. I left. I went to go freelance, and I was just going to freelance and do ArtHaus and live my best life and just be a creative dynamo in Orlando. And I wasn't really worried about it. I was actually going month to month and I was making sales happen and I was doing it. And it was one of those pinch me, like, is this really sustaining itself? Can I do this? And then I found out about Curry Ford West. I saw that they were in need of an executive director. And to me, it seemed like a perfect opportunity where I got to use, like we were talking about before, I have this really administrative side and very organized type A side, but then I do have this big creative, fiery passion within me. So I felt like that job was going to marry those two, that I could be very organized and keep everyone in check with plans and schedules, but then I could be creative with the types of projects we were doing. And really anybody who's involved in that organization of the Main Streets or Main Street America, because it is a nationwide program, it's a very exhausting role to be an executive director of a nonprofit. You know, you're working with volunteers, you're relying on donations for your salary. It's a lot on your shoulders. And I think that pressure and that weight of doing that role for about a year and a half, it stifled any creative force that I had. All energy was put towards keeping that afloat because it was just so all consuming. So I appreciate that I kind of moved into a different faculty to be working
Yeah.
with my family now and have different opportunities. So now when things are coming up, people ask me, they're like, where did this come from? You know, and I tell them, I said, I think I had space to be creative again. I think I finally had enough balance in my life to have those ideas that came out and said, let's take this and run with it. Where when you're in crisis mode and you're always responding to fires, I think it doesn't allow a lot of oxygen to make those ideas grow.
No, I totally agree with that, and I think that's kind of one of the burnout is very quick and easy. So it's using your oxygen idea, like that is definitely something that kind of can definitely extinguish your creative flame, because you're just constantly constantly trying, and it's difficult. I definitely appreciate all the different directors that do this for different districts, to see that, because it's tough. It's definitely a hard job to be able to do. um One of the things that I kind of want to chat a little bit about, something that you just started, and I know it's somewhat recent, and it's like your newest thing, where you're hosting kind of like it's a non-alcoholic social experience, and it's called Sober Betties. Can you talk a little bit about that, and then where did that kind of come from? What can people expect of it? What is it? What is it? If people were interested in it, I'm kind of give me a little bit of a rundown on that.
It is my newest idea. It is definitely my brainchild and probably one of the ones that I'm closest to, even more than like Faces of Kalouhs or anything, because that was a little bit more of like a talk show. I'm a character, I'm a hostess. It was very surface level. But just so you know, and for your listeners to know, I'm sober personally. I've been sober for 6 years.
Congratulations.
Thank you, one day at a time, right? So it was December of 2017 that I had my last drink at an Olive Garden, the one on Colonial.
Oh,
And
of all places.
I know, right? Of all places, it wasn't even like shots or something. It was like some weird
Yeah.
sangria or something. But the point is, I love the fact that more bars are embracing the mocktail culture. There's so many NA beers now. But back when I was a raging alcoholic, there was like O'Doul's and that was it. And it was just that
Yep.
weird brown bottle with that green label, and it was like the smut. It was just like nobody wanted to drink that. And now, Heineken's got one, and Budweiser, everyone's got one, and Corona's got one, and people are making them up. They're doing stuff with botanicals, and there's THC and CBD. Just the non-alcoholic industry is booming. But what I always saw is that it's an alcoholic space that they're injecting their non-alcoholic options into. So it's like, I know that when I go to a bar, I'm not going to drink, but I go from having options of water and soda to all of these things that they can charge me the same amount for, which is, again, is fine. That's their business model. But when I go out to parties, whether it's a friend's party or I go out to a bar, which I'm still comfortable with, and some sober people aren't even comfortable enough to go to bars. So that's a first inhibitor. But then when I go there, I have to know that everyone around me is going to probably be drinking, and that everyone around me is going to start to kind of deteriorate through the night and get a little more inebriated. And I'm really tired of having drinks spilled on me as a non drinker. Getting covered in sticky beer is like so disgusting and insulting and rude. And, I'm not going to wear a sign that
Yeah.
says I'm sober, but that's the kind of stuff that happens to you. So it totally changed my paradigm when I actually went to a friend's wedding. My boyfriend was the best man, and we went to this wedding up in Minnesota, of all places, and there was no alcohol at it. I mean, like, no alcohol at a wedding. And when I say that my mind was blown, it was like blown to smithereens. I felt so safe. It wasn't even for me, obviously. Like, this is for the bride and groom. Like, they had it dry
Yeah.
for their reasons. But I want to talk about just the way that that environment felt for me as a sober person, that I never had to worry about what I was picking up, what drink I was grabbing, what options that I have to ask. Does this have alcohol or is this not? And I just got to kind of be free in that way. And so then I came back and I sat on it for a little while. And a friend of mine is a great event planner. Her name is Shane Briscoe. And she was posting about an event with a tier of cupcakes. So she had posted this picture of these cupcakes and made some comment that they were like rum filled or something like that. And I remember commenting on it saying, well, just make sure they're properly labeled so that sober Betties like me don't accidentally partake. And that mind magnet, that spark went off, and I couldn't shake the name. And I just thought it was the cutest thing. And it was, again, so marketable, that it's just a way to refer to yourself as this kind of like retro pinup person who's choosing to not drink. And so the events, going back to if somebody wanted to know about them, that you don't need to be a sober person. You don't have to be 100% sober like me. And, I'm not even as 100% as some other people are, because I'll still drink an NA beer that has point whatever of it in there. And there's some purists who say, for whatever reason, there's just 0% zero, and that option is for them. So, I'm not even as extreme as some cases can be. So I wanted to create a space where it starts by being non-alcoholic, and alcohol never gets injected into it. And so there's no like, well, these are the people who are drinking and these aren't. And we just had our first event over the weekend, and it had a higher turnout than we were expecting. People stayed longer, and it ended at 10, and by 11:30 we're like shuffling people towards the door because I kept networking and kept chatting and kept mingling and kept dancing. We're like, okay, like, don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. And we're like kicking them out, and they're not even drinking. So just
Yeah.
watching the excitement and the natural energy and the organic connections that were made from it, it makes me feel like we're onto something.
I love it. I love it. And then is it just you running it, or do you have others that are also part of your Sober Betties group that's kind of helping you with it, or how is that kind of coming along?
The way that it started was because that event planner that I was talking about, who put that picture of her cupcakes up, Shane Briscoe is just a creative force. Her background, she originally was in like film and production and would be up in Atlanta making movies and TV shows and working with big names. And then she was in fashion in Miami before that. And then she came down here and she started planning events. And, they're usually smaller events. They're for friends and family, they're for people's birthday parties, for Valentine's Day, things like that. But she always had a certain experience, right? So there'd be photo ops, there'd be a very intentional placement of everything. And she was just, that detail oriented person that I jive with, where I'm like, you have the right priorities for me. So she had just happened to mention at a girls' night, she said, I want to do more event planning. And I said, well, do I have an idea for you? Because it's not so much that I actually want to be planning all these events.
Yeah.
I'm very experienced when it comes to events, and my family has a music festival we've done for 14 years up in Minnesota. So it's like no
Yep.
stranger to events. I just don't want to be doing it alone. So I brought her in and said, if I maintain primarily the online portion of this, I'm running the Facebook group, I'm doing the Discord server, I'm doing the website, I'm doing kind of the online Betties. then that creates a hub where no matter if you're in Montana or Thailand, which I actually have friends in both, like you could join and be in the Sober Betties community and you could be watching all this happen and then you'd be yelling at me, I want to bring one to my community. And then I'd fly over there and host one there. So that's kind of the vision of how I see it happening because the the essence of the events, it's really simple. It's really accessible because if we look back to where my background came from, I started in cosplay, right? And everything is MegaCon, DragonCon. It's big. It's accurate to the movie, or it's a spin-off, and it's all about the craftsmanship and the detailing, and it's really serious, right? But to be rockabilly or pinup or even just retro like Mad Men inspired, you don't have to look like you're in a costume. You don't have to look like a character. You could go to Sober Betty's and go to Publix after, and people would just be like, "You're looking so fly," you know. It's like nobody would assume that you're like She-Hulk or something. So I
Yeah.
think that it makes it that you can be as costumey and as fashionable as you want to, or you could just be wearing a little bandana and some high-waisted pants, and all Betties and buddies are welcome. So it's not just for women either, but we definitely market towards the gals.
Yeah. No, I love that. Is there when you, out of curiosity, for your first event, did you have like a specific mocktail? Like, is that kind of an idea that you're gonna have like a specific one for like each event? Each one has like a mocktail, or was there like a mocktail station type thing? Or I'm just kind of curious on like what on what would I be, what were you drinking during that time? Like, what mocktails were you drinking?
It was definitely a curated menu, and for each one, it's going to be a little bit different because we're going to do them monthly, but we're going to move around so people can go different places and try different, be
Yeah.
exposed to different small businesses. So the first one was hosted at Crave and Joy, which actually is in the Curry Ford West District, and because she is already the woman who owns it, Yaxira, she already is serving non-alcoholic beverages. So they have these like caffeinated refreshers that are packed full of vitamins and they've got other stuff in there that are really good for you. So she had a special list of the flavors that she had put together that I made, like cute little names. So there's one called like the No Hito and stuff like that. But then I had also tried to reach out to non alcoholic vendors to say, hey, we're doing this. Help us do proof of concept. Would you provide some product so that people who've never seen your product could try a little bit before they go buy it from a Total Wine or something? So she had her bar, which is where she was making her drinks for the event. And then we had a little station, which you learn a lot from your first event because people couldn't really tell because we had all the drinks in the coolers. They
Yeah.
didn't really know that we had drinks on our side too. And that's where people could try samples of like the Bravas Brewing NA beer. We had Curious Elixirs who had sent over some mocktails, and they only gave us one bottle of each mocktail of four different mocktails. So we were doing little mocktail flights. So you buy one drink ticket for $8, and that drink ticket either got you one of Yaxira's Crave and Joy refreshers or it got you one of ours. So it will always vary because our next one, for example, is at Rarity Tattoo just up the road, but they don't serve any drinks. So kind of brainstorming who of their neighbors might be able to provide some, or people like Liquid Death sponsor us. That would be great to have them provide some very on brand non-alcoholic options.
Yeah.
But I think the more we diversify that, the better. Because, for example, if we always had events with the same two NAs, then those Betties are always going to keep trying those same brands. But if we always have different things for them to sample, then it keeps exposing you to different brands and flavors that you might like.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. Do you have a favorite, out of curiosity, do you have like a favorite mocktail that you make at home, or when you go out and about?
I am a huge fan of ginger beer. I love the bite. I love the bubbles. I'm a big fan of that. The the sober Betty is kind of the social, the meetup, the pinup-y style of it, but the actual Facebook group I refer to as the Shirley Temple Society because it reminds me of Are You Afraid of the Dark? Early Nickelodeon days when
Yeah.
we would have the meeting of the Midnight Society. And so trying to hit all those nostalgia bones. And so we have this little pin, which of course I don't have handy, but there's this cute little pin which has three cherries with interlocking stems, making a Celtic knot, which is a symbol used a lot for women to represent the three different phases of life: youth, as we age, and then older age and transition and stuff. So
Yeah.
I think that there's a lot of symbolism in Shirley Temples in that kind
Yeah.
of just grenadine classic. Can't go wrong.
Yeah. You can't go wrong with that. I truly love all that. I think it's great. I love seeing the art. I saw the different pinup versions of different character people or different sober betties. And I just think it's a very cool concept. I love things like that where you can kind of create some form of community based on something that you are passionate about. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I did sandwich eat up events for so long. I think it's just something that could be a lot of fun to do. And who doesn't love to just build some camaraderie, community? I mean, people just kind of need that a little bit more in real life type stuff. I saw some video of you dancing, and everyone was dressed to impress. It was definitely, it looked like a lot of fun. I was like super excited for you
Well, I think
when I
about,
saw the
and you
videos.
were asking earlier about, individual creatives, and a lot of people don't like marketing. A lot of people don't like giving the pitch and getting in front of the camera and always being able to coordinate things like that. So having a meetup that does have kind of that dress up and take photos element, that helps people keep fresh content. And then you have pictures with
Yeah.
other people. You have pictures doing different things. You have pictures from professional photographers that you didn't have to pay for. It's like you get a
Yeah.
lot from showing up to one of our events.
No, I think that's great, and we'll definitely include it in the show notes so that way you can definitely follow when you're looking at everything. What advice do you have for someone wanting to start something?
As a practical person, I want to say, going back to that balance, right? And when I gave that
Yeah.
example of how my mom handles her schedule versus how I manage mine. And when I say balance, it's not in this fluffy, ethereal work life balance that's never attainable kind of way, but it really says, what does balance look like to you? For me, my boyfriend and I, we both have remote jobs, so we work from home now. And I kept realizing that I had a meeting that was always overlapping when he had a gap to eat lunch. And it was really important for us to eat lunch together. My mom noticed this and she happened to mention and say, "Hey, do you want us to move these meetings?" Because they're just check ins with our team. Like they didn't have to be there for
Yeah.
any other reason. She said, "Do you want us to move those a half hour so you can actually have dinner with Jordan, lunch with Jordan? Because that seems to be important to you." Now, not every employer is going to be able to do that. You're not always going to rearrange your life to have every
Yeah.
lunch with your partner. But when you find things that do make a big difference in your life for balance, I think that's going to help you have that space for creativity, like we were talking about, because entrepreneurship doesn't stop. There's always fires. There's always stuff that I could be doing. I have to-do lists that are like, why are you filming a podcast when you have these things to be doing, right? That's what your intrusive
Yep.
thoughts think. So I think when you look at balance, it's, my mother would call it being directionally correct. It's like being, I'm on the right path.
Yeah. No, I think that's fun. What what do you do for fun? Since you do so many different things.
I do. I feel like I should say that art is what I do for fun, but that tends to be a little commercialized. So when I need to kind of take a minute away from all the screens,
Yeah.
because of where we live near Lake Ivanhoe, my boyfriend and I will actually like just go take a walk. And our favorite thing to do is either walk around Lake Ivanhoe or Lake Eola and look for the duckies, like all the tiny little ducks when they're just hatching, and
Yeah.
little swans and little baby ducks and stuff. So that tends to be a big source of joy.
No, I love that. I love that. Where can people follow you and check your work at, and be able to kind of maybe follow, Sober Betties? Give people a little bit of a plug of some of the websites that we could have that you're going to be able to see on the show notes as well.
I love to keep it easy. So if you check those show notes down below, it is Kaluohs on everything. So kaluohs.com is the website. Facebook and Instagram is all Kaluohs. TikTok is Kaluohs, but I don't use it often. So if you start there, you'll find me on all the platforms, including Sober
I love
Betties.
it.
That's on Kaluohs too, or just
Yes.
soberbetties.com.
That and yeah, no, it's definitely good. You'll definitely be able to see all those things and be able to check it out. Uh, Sarah, I really appreciate you taking the time. It's been great. We've been interacting for a while on social, so just the fact that we get to like kind of talk a little bit and spend some time and be able to share, I think it's great what you're doing and what you're creating. And obviously, if you have some conflict and you have a small business of your own, and I think she's also, relatively speaking, is also part of it. I definitely there's definitely different angles that you're definitely showcasing. So I definitely appreciate you for being on today.
Well, I thank you for taking this time over your lunch hour to chat a little bit about it, and yeah, onward and upward.
For sure, for sure. Well, that's our show for today. Thank you so much to Sarah Shoulak for being on of Kaluohs, and definitely check them out online. If you enjoyed the show, definitely make sure to subscribe, leave a rating, tell your friends, especially if you have a special guest that you enjoyed. Definitely share them. It's spread the wealth. If you want to support me, check out my brand, Deli Fresh Threads. Do some shopping. Obviously, sandwich selfies are always encouraged. Thank you. Until next time, keep eating sandwiches and follow your passion. Thanks, everyone.